Alright, so in this video we're going to learn how to solve a quadratic by taking a square root. Step 1 is you need to get x squared by itself by doing inverse operations just like two-step equations. The second step is to take the square root of both sides, and then our answer will be a positive and a negative. So we'll always have two answers most of the time to these problems. Okay. So I'm going to do the ones in the left column and you're going to do the ones in the right column. But let's take a look at this first one. So I need to get x squared by itself by doing the opposite of a minus 4, which is a plus 4. So I'm going to do it to both sides. I'm going to be left with x squared equals a 4. The next thing I'm going to do is take the square root of both sides. So this is our square root sign. Okay. And a square root and a squared are going to cancel each other out. They're inverse operations. And so you're going to be left with an x. And then you're going to write plus or minus because you're taking the square root of something. And the square root of a 4 is a 2. So our answer would be x equals a plus or minus 2. So what that means is x equals 2 is a solution, and x equals negative 2 will work for that problem. Okay? All right, so why don't you try this one over here on your own? Press pause, and we will talk about it. All right, so on this one over here, the first thing I did was I added 81 to both sides, and I canceled out my 81s. I got x squared equals 81. I took the square root of both sides, and that gave me an x. Do not forget your plus or minus, and the square root of 81 is a 9. So what's nice about these is when they're perfect squares, you're going to get a whole number. Okay, so what that means is x equals 9 is a solution, and x equals negative 9 is also a solution. So let's take a look at when our numbers are not perfect squares and what we do. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 50 to get x squared by itself. I would get x squared equals 50. I'm going to take the square root. But the thing is, the square root of 50 is not a perfect square. And so what I have to do is simplify it. And to do that, we're going to learn what we did the other day and break down the square root of 50. So 50 would be 5 times 10. And then 10 is 5 times 2. And bring down that final 5. Okay? If you have a pair of numbers, you're going to take them out. So I have a pair of 5s. And 5 times 5 is 25. And so the square root of 25 is just a 5. So I'm going to write a 5 once. And 5 root 2. So my answer is going to be plus or minus 5 root 2. Okay? Every time you take the square root of something, you're going to have a plus and a minus. Okay? And that's probably the trickiest thing to remember on those problems. So when you get x squared equals not a perfect square, you're going to have to break it down over here to the side and put a plus or a minus. So why don't you try this one over here on your own? Press pause and we will go over it. Over here, you should have added 12 to both sides and got x squared equals 12. Take the square root of both sides. So then x equals plus or minus root 12. So I went over here and I broke down the square root of 12 into 2 times 6, which is then 2 times 2 times 3. I had a pair of 2's, and 2 times 4, or 2 times 2 is 4, which the square root of 4 is a 2. So I took out a 2, and then I brought down the square root of 3. So again, your final answer is plus or minus square root 2 square root of 3. Okay? All right. Let's take a look at some harder examples. This is just more like a two-step problem, so it's a few more steps. So again, you're going to plus 12 to both sides, and you would get 2x squared equals 32. 20 plus 12 is 32. Divide by 2. So x squared equals 16. So now we're to a point where I'm going to take the square root of both sides. The nice thing about 16 is it's a perfect square. So I'm going to get plus or minus 4. So square root of 16 would be a 4. Okay, so it's really nice if the number before you square root is a perfect square. All right, why don't you try this one on your own? Press pause and we will go over the answer. All right, so on this one, I added 70, got 72, divided by 8, and got x squared equals a 9. Good thing about 9 is it's a perfect square, so when you square root both sides, you'll get x equals, don't forget your plus minus, and a 3. Okay? So that is how you solve by taking the square root. Let's take a look at the back page at some trickier problems. So on this side, again, we're still going to get rid of that negative 7 by adding 7. I would get 25x squared equals 7. I would divide by 25, which is going to give me a fraction. So I would leave it as x squared equals 7 over 25. Okay, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Okay, when I take the square root of a fraction, remember, that becomes square root of 7 on top and square root of 25 on bottom. Okay, square root of 7 cannot be reduced because 7 is a prime number, but the square root of 25 is a 5. Okay, so your final answer would be x equals plus or minus square root of 7 over 5. Okay, so don't forget, every time you're taking the square root, you got plus minus. Okay, all right, so why don't you try this one on your own? It is a fraction, but do not forget. This one was a little bit trickier. You do add 6 to both sides. You will get 8x squared equals 6. Divide by 8. And here's the thing is, if you can reduce a fraction, I would at this point. So 6 over 8 can be reduced to 3 over 4. So I got x squared equals 3 over 4. Then I took the square root of both sides. So I did square root of 3 and square root of 4 on bottom. And square root of 4 is a perfect square, and the square root of 4 is a 2. So I simplified that on bottom, and then I just did plus or minus square root of 3 on top because square root of 3 is a prime number and cannot be reduced. Okay. All right, so let's look at some ones that look different. So these look like vertex form. So I've got an x in parentheses like this. So these are a little bit trickier, but you still kind of do the first step of getting the parenthesis by itself by adding 100. Okay, so you would have x minus 5 in parentheses equals 100. Okay, so now what you have to do is to get rid of this square term is you take the square root right now. So you would square root both sides, and that would leave you with x minus 5. Okay, so if you've got something in parentheses squared, then you take the square root, which will cancel out the parentheses in the squared term, leaving you with x minus 5. Now the tricky part is remembering this plus or minus. So the square root of 100 is going to be plus or minus 10. Okay, the last thing you're going to do is you're going to get x by itself by doing the inverse operation. And how you write this problem is the 5 would go first, the plus or minus goes in between the two numbers with the 10. Okay, you always want the plus or the minus in between the two numbers. Okay, and then you would solve this problem twice. You would do it one way with the plus, so you kind of go like up and do 5 plus 10, which is 15. And then you would also do it with the minus sign. So then you would do 5 minus 10, which is negative 5. So you can leave your answer like this, or you can say x equals 15 and x equals negative 5. Okay. So a little tricky with there, a little bit more steps. Okay. All right, you try this one on your own. Press pause and we'll go over the answer. Over here, you're going to add 25 to both sides. That'll cancel out, leaving with x minus 3 squared equals 25. Now you have to take the square root to get these parentheses to go away. And the square root of a 25 is a plus or minus 5. So you've got x minus 3 equals plus or minus 5. You will add 3 to cancel these out. And again, you will rewrite this with the 3 in front with the plus or minus after it. So then you can leave your answer like this. Or you would do 3 plus 5 to get 8 as one answer. And then 3 minus 5 to get negative 2 as your other answer. Okay? All right. One more problem, and then we are done. So these are a little trickier. These are the hardest they will get. Okay. So again, you're still going to plus 12 to both sides. You would get x minus 2 squared equals 12 times the square root, both sides. So that will leave you with x minus 2 equals plus or minus square root of 12. Okay? Last step again is to add 12. Add 2, I mean. And so we will get x equals 2 plus or minus square root of 12. Okay? The only thing is this can be simplified more. So square root of 12 can be broken down. And we're going to have to do that. So the hardest part is breaking down your square roots and simplifying them. So 2 times 6 is 12. 2 times 3 is 6. Bring down that 2. I have a pair of 2's, so take it out and write it once. So 2 root 3 is the same as a 12, square root of 12, so I'm going to replace it. So my answer is 2 plus or minus 2 square root 3. And then our answer is finally simplified. Okay? So if you leave it like this, you're not wrong, you're just not the most simplified. And we will not do it one way with the plus or the minus unless it wants a decimal, but usually it wants an answer like this. Okay? All right, you tried this last one on your own. So on this one, you should have added 20 to both sides and got x plus 4 squared equals 20. You will square root it and get x plus 4. Don't forget plus or minus square root of 20. You will subtract 4. Again, you will write that number first with the plus or minus square root of 20. This is your answer. The only thing is you need to break down square root of 20 to simplify it. 20 is 2 times 10, which is 2 times 5. So I had a pair of 2's in common, and I should have written it once, and I wrote it twice. So it should be 2 root 5. So all I did was I replaced 2 root 5 with the square root of 20. So your answer was negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 5. Okay? So that is how you simplify fractions and solve them with taking the square root. So one last thing. Here's a quick way to see how many solutions there are. So if you get x squared equals a negative number, you're going to get no solution because you cannot take the square root of a negative number. If you get x squared equals 0, the square root of 0 is 0, which means you're only going to have one solution. And lastly, if you have x squared equals a number, when you take the square root, you will have 2 solutions. So notice on all of these, we had a plus or a minus, which means I have a positive answer and I have a negative answer. Okay? So that's how you solve by taking square roots. Thanks for watching.